What if everything you believed about yourself was a lie? What if the very weakness that made you an outcast was actually the key to saving an entire kingdom? In the shadowed forests of the Pacific Northwest, where ancient pines whisper secrets and moonlight reveals truths, one Omega is about to discover that destiny has a twisted sense of humor. Marked from birth as the weakest of her kind, mocked by her own pack, and deemed unworthy of even the most basic respect. She never imagined that her courage would be the thing to save the most powerful alpha in existence. If you love stories of hidden power, forbidden romance, and underdogs who rise to change everything, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because this journey is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Chapter 1. The burden of being nothing. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like shame clings to skin, and Lyra Ashwood knew both intimately. She pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient Douglas fir, her heart hammering against her ribs as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. They'd found her again. There she is. Marcus Blackthorn's voice cut through the dawn air like a blade. The little runt thinks she can hide from us. Lyra closed her eyes, drawing in a shaky breath. At 19, she should have been preparing for her first heat. Should have been courted by eager betas. Should have been something. Instead, she was what the pack whispered about in hushed, pitying tones, the Omega so weak that even her scent was barely detectable. Marcus emerged from behind a cluster of ferns, his beta strength radiating from him in waves that made Lyra's knees buckle. Behind him came Sarah Chen and David Rodriguez, both wearing the same expression of cruel amusement. "Look at her," Sarah sneered. "Cowering like a wounded animal. How pathetic." "The Alpha should have left you in the woods when you were born," David added. "Would have saved us all the embarrassment." "I wasn't bothering anyone," Lyra managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just existing where you don't belong?" Marcus stepped closer, his scent overwhelming her sensitive nose. Just taking up space that could be used by someone worthy? The word hit her like a physical blow. Worthy. It was the one thing she'd never been. Never could be. "My father says you're a drain on pack resources," Sarah continued. "Says maybe it's time the Alpha reconsidered your membership." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Lyra knew what happened to Omegas who were cast out. They died, alone and forgotten. "I work," Lyra said desperately. "I help in the kitchens, I clean." "You do the jobs no one else wants," Marcus interrupted. "That's not the same as being useful." He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek with mock gentleness. "You know what I think? I think you're not really an Omega at all. I think you're just broken." The words shattered something inside her chest. Broken. Yes, that felt right. "Marcus." David's voice carried a warning. "Someone's coming." Alpha Thomas Ashwood emerged from the morning mist, his presence commanding even in casual clothes. At 52, he was still formidable, his dark hair streaked with silver, his green eyes, so like Lyra's own, sharp with intelligence and power. He was also, unfortunately, her father. "What's going on here?" His voice carried absolute authority. "Nothing, Alpha," Marcus said quickly. "We were just talking with Lyra." Thomas's gaze swept over the scene, his daughter pressed against a tree, 3 pack members in a loose circle around her, the scent of fear thick in the air. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Lyra, you're needed in the kitchens. The pack council meets tonight and Elena needs help with preparations." It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal, a reminder of her place in the hierarchy. "Yes, Alpha," she whispered. As she walked past him, Thomas caught her arm gently. For a moment, she thought he might offer comfort or protection. Instead, he simply said, "Try to stay out of trouble." The kitchens were already bustling when she arrived. Elena Vasquez, the pack's head cook and one of the few people who treated Lyra with basic kindness, looked up from a massive pot of stew and smiled. "There you are, mija," Elena said warmly. "I was beginning to worry." "Sorry," Lyra mumbled, tying an apron around her waist. "I was delayed." Elena's dark eyes studied her face, taking in the tear tracks and lingering scent of distress. "The council meeting tonight," Elena said carefully, handing Lyra a basket of vegetables. "It's important. Representatives from 3 neighboring packs will be here, including—" She paused, as if the words carried weight. "Including who?" Lyra asked. "Alpha King Kieran Nightshade." The basket slipped from Lyra's hands, vegetables scattering across the floor. "The Alpha King." The most powerful werewolf in North America, ruler of the Western Territories. Why? Lyra whispered, dropping to her knees to gather the scattered vegetables. Why is he coming here? Elena knelt beside her. There have been incidents, rogue attacks on the border territories. Pax going silent. The king is calling for unity, for a coordinated response. The rest of the day passed in preparation. Lyra scrubbed floors until her knees ached, polished silverware until her reflection stared back from every surface. All the while, she tried not to think about the Alpha King's impending arrival. As evening approached, the pack house transformed. The great hall became something grand and imposing. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. The long oak table gleamed under the chandelier. Lyra watched from the kitchen doorway as pack members filed into the hall, all dressed in their finest clothes. The alphas and betas moved with confident grace. Even the other omegas looked beautiful and important in their flowing dresses. And then the doors opened, and everything changed. Alpha King Kieran Nightshade entered like a force of nature, his presence so overwhelming that conversations died mid-sentence. He was tall, taller than any man had a right to be, with broad shoulders that strained against his black suit jacket and dark hair that looked like it had been touched by midnight itself. But it was his eyes that stole Lyra's breath. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and silver and dangerous, and when they swept across the room, she felt as though he could see straight through to her soul. Alpha Thomas. The king's voice was deep and rich. Thank you for hosting this gathering. The honor is ours, Your Majesty, Thomas replied, bowing his head. Please sit. We have much to discuss. As the king moved toward the head of the table, his gaze swept across the room once more. For just a moment, so brief Lyra thought she might have imagined it, his eyes met hers across the distance. The contact lasted less than a heartbeat, but it left her feeling as though she'd been struck by lightning. Then Elena was pulling her back into the kitchen, muttering about serving the first course. Stay in here, Elena warned, her voice unusually sharp. Tonight is not for the likes of us. The king? His power is... She shuddered. Just stay hidden, Mija. Promise me, Lyra promised, though she didn't understand the fear in Elena's voice. She was refilling water glasses when she heard her father's voice rise above the others. The rogue attacks are coordinated, Thomas was saying gravely. This isn't random violence. Someone is organizing them. But who? Asked Alpha Rebecca Morrison from the Silver Pine Pack. And why? Chaos, the king replied, his voice cutting through the discussion like a blade. Chaos serves those who seek to overthrow the established order. A chill ran down Lyra's spine. The idea that someone was orchestrating the attacks, using them as a distraction for something larger, you... Think there's a traitor, Alpha David, Blackstone said. I think we're facing an enemy who understands our weaknesses better than we understand them, ourselves. Lyra was so focused on the conversation that she didn't notice the water glass overflowing until cold. Liquid splashed across her hand. She jerked back with a small gasp, the pitcher slipping from her fingers. Time seemed to slow as the ceramic vessel fell toward the floor. Lyra lunged forward, but she knew she was too late. The crash would interrupt the meeting, draw attention to her clumsiness, but the crash never came. Instead, a strong hand caught the pitcher mere inches from the floor, moving with inhuman speed. Lyra found herself staring into storm-gray eyes, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Alpha King Kieran Nightshade straightened slowly, the pitcher cradled in his large hands. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. His scent a complex mixture of pine, leather, and something wild that made her wolf whimper in recognition. Careful, he said softly, his voice meant for her ears alone. Accidents can be revealing. He handed her the pitcher, his fingers brushing against hers for just a moment. The contact sent electricity racing up her arm. Thank you, she whispered. The king studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, just a slight curve of his lips, and returned to his seat as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Lyra could feel it in the way her skin tingled where he'd touched her, in the way her wolf was suddenly restless and alert. Accidents can be revealing. What had he meant by that? The meeting continued late into the night. Lyra was cleaning the last dishes when Elena found her, her face pale with worry. Mija, Elena said urgently, you need to be very careful. The king? He asked about you? Lyra's hands stilled. What do you mean? He asked your father about the Pax Omegas. Specifically, he asked about the one who served the water. Elena gripped Lyra's shoulders. Thomas told him you were nobody important, just a weak Omega who helped in the kitchens. But the king? He didn't look convinced. Fear and something else, something that might have been hope, warred in Lyra's chest. Why would the Alpha King care about me? I don't know, Elena admitted. But powerful men don't ask questions without reason. If he's interested in you, it could mean great things or terrible things. Maybe both. That night, Lyra lay in her small room, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the day's events. The Alpha King had noticed her, the weakest Omega in the pack. But why? Outside her window, the full moon hung heavy and silver in the star-scattered sky. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, a sound of longing and wildness that echoed in her bones. Her own wolf stirred restlessly, as if sensing that change was coming. She was right. The attack came at dawn. What happens when the Alpha King's enemies strike at the heart of Moonridge Pack? And what role will our weakest Omega play in the battle that's about to unfold? The next chapter will reveal secrets that will change everything. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the explosive continuation of this story. Chapter 2. When weakness becomes strength. The first scream shattered the pre-dawn silence like glass. Lyra jolted awake, her heart immediately racing as the sound of terror echoed through the pack house. For a moment she lay frozen, hoping desperately that she was still dreaming. But then came the second scream, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood and snarling wolves. The pack was under attack. She rolled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor as chaos erupted around her. Through her small window, she could see dark shapes moving between the trees. Rogues, dozens of them, their eyes glowing red with bloodlust. "Elena!" Lyra called out, rushing toward the older woman's room. But the hallway was already filling with smoke, and the acrid scent of burning wood made her eyes water. "Here, mija." Elena's voice came from the kitchen, strained with fear but alive. Lyra ran toward the sound, dodging falling debris as the pack house shuddered under assault. The great hall where they'd hosted the Alpha King just hours before was now a war zone. Tables were overturned, crystal glasses lay shattered, and the beautiful tapestries were ablaze. She found Elena crouched behind the kitchen island, clutching a large knife with shaking hands. "The rogues," Elena gasped. "They came from everywhere at once. It's like they knew exactly where to strike." "Where's my father?" Lyra asked. "Fighting with the others near the main entrance," Elena confirmed. "But Lyra, there are so many of them. And they're not like normal rogues. They're organized, coordinated." A crash from above made them both flinch. Dust rained down from the ceiling. "We need to get out of here," Lyra said, helping Elena to her feet. "The servants' entrance is blocked," Elena interrupted. "I already checked. They've surrounded the entire building." Fear clawed at Lyra's throat. They were trapped, and she was the weakest member of the pack. In a fight, she would be nothing but a liability. Another sound reached her ears, a roar of pain and rage that she recognized immediately. Her father. Without thinking, Lyra ran toward the sound, ignoring Elena's calls. She had to see, had to know if her father was all right. The Great Hall was a nightmare of smoke and violence. Pack members fought desperately against the invading rogues, but the rogues outnumbered them 3-1. In the center of the chaos, Alpha Thomas battled a massive rogue with silver-streaked fur and scars crisscrossing his muzzle. The rogue was larger, stronger, and fighting with the fury of the truly insane. "Father," Lyra screamed, but her voice was lost in the din of battle. She watched in horror as the rogue's claws raked across Thomas's chest, sending him stumbling backward. Blood bloomed across his shirt, and she could see the exhaustion in his movements. He was losing. But then another figure entered the fray, moving with lethal grace. Alpha King Kieran Nightshade had shifted into his wolf form, and he was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. His wolf was enormous, easily twice the size of any normal werewolf, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb light. His eyes burned silver in the smoky air, and when he snarled, the sound was like thunder. The king launched himself at the rogue attacking Thomas, his massive jaws clamping down on the enemy's throat. The rogue's howl cut off abruptly, and then there was only silence. But even as one threat ended, another emerged. From the shadows near the main staircase, a figure stepped forward. A man Lyra had never seen before, tall and lean with pale skin and eyes like chips of ice. Kieran Nightshade. the stranger called out. Still playing hero, I see. The king shifted back to human form, standing protectively in front of Thomas. Damien Cross, the king replied, his voice deadly calm. I should have known you were behind this. Damien smiled coldly. Did you really think you could unite the packs against me? Did you think your little council meetings would be enough? I think you've made a grave mistake coming here, have I? Damien gestured to the chaos around them. Your precious pack allies are falling, Kieran, and soon, you'll join them. He raised his hand, and Lyra saw something that made her blood run cold. His fingers ended in claws that gleamed with an oily black substance that seemed to writhe on its own. Poison. He had poisoned claws. Look out! Lyra screamed, but her warning came too late. Damien moved with inhuman speed, his claws slashing toward the king's throat. Kieran dodged, but not quickly enough. The poisoned talons raked across his shoulder, tearing through his shirt and into the flesh beneath. The king stumbled, his face going pale as the poison began to work through his system. Whatever Damien had coated his claws with, it was designed specifically to harm werewolves. The great Alpha King, Damien sneered, circling his wounded prey. Not so mighty now, are you? Kieran tried to shift, but his wolf form flickered and failed. The poison was blocking his transformation, leaving him trapped and growing weaker by the second. This is how it ends, Damien continued, raising his claws for the killing blow. With the king's death, the packs will fall into chaos, and from that chaos, a new order will rise. My order. Lyra watched in horror as the poisoned claws descended toward Kieran's heart. The most powerful alpha in North America was about to die, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it, nothing anyone else could do. But Lyra wasn't anyone else. She was the weakest Omega, the one everyone overlooked, the one who had spent her entire life being invisible. And sometimes, being invisible was exactly what you needed to be. She moved without thinking, throwing herself between Damien and the king, her arms spread wide in a futile gesture of protection. No, she screamed. Damien's claws, meant for Kieran's heart, instead slashed across Lyra's chest. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and overwhelming, and she felt the poison burning in her veins like liquid fire. But something else happened too, something that made Damien's eyes widen in shock and fear. The moment his poisoned claws touched her skin, they began to smoke and hiss. The oily black substance bubbled and steamed, and Damien jerked his hand back with a cry of pain. Impossible, he whispered, staring at his claws. Where they had touched Lyra, the poison was gone, neutralized by something in her blood. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her vision blurring as pain overwhelmed her. But even through the agony, she could feel something stirring inside her. Something that had been dormant her entire life, waiting for this moment to awaken. Power. Raw, untamed, and utterly unlike anything she'd ever felt before. You, Damien breathed, his ice blue eyes fixed on her with fascination and terror. You're one of them, a Null. The word meant nothing to Lyra, but it clearly meant something to everyone else. Around the Great Hall, the fighting had stopped. Rogues and pack members alike stared at her with expressions of awe and fear. A Null, Kieran repeated, his voice filled with wonder. The color was already returning to his face as the neutralized poison lost its hold. I thought they were extinct. What's a Null? Lyra gasped, pressing her hand to the wounds on her chest. A werewolf who can neutralize supernatural toxins and curses, Kieran explained, pushing himself to his feet. They were the healers of the old packs, the ones who could cure what others couldn't, but they were hunted to extinction centuries ago. Not extinct, Damien snarled, hidden, protected, but not for much longer. He raised his hand again, but this time it wasn't claws that emerged. It was something worse, tendrils of shadow that writhed like living things, reaching toward Lyra with hungry intent. If I can't poison you, he said, his voice taking on an inhuman quality, I'll drain you instead. The shadow tendrils wrapped around Lyra's wrists, and immediately she felt her strength being pulled away. She tried to struggle, but the shadows held her fast. Let her go, Kieran commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his alpha authority. Damien laughed. You're in no position to make demands, King. Soon she'll be nothing but an empty shell, and her power will be mine. But Damien had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that Lyra's power was limited to neutralizing poisons. He didn't understand that being a Null meant something far more significant. It meant she was immune to all supernatural influences, including his shadow magic, the Soul. Tendrils that wrapped around her wrists began to smoke and dissolve, just as his poison claws had done. Damien's eyes widened in shock as his magic was turned back on itself. Impossible, he whispered again, but this time there was fear in his voice. Lyra felt the last of the shadow magic dissipate, and with it came a rush of understanding. She wasn't just immune to supernatural attacks, she could reflect them, turn them back on their source. "You want to know what's impossible?" she said, rising to her feet with newfound confidence. "Impossible is thinking you could come into our home, hurt our people, and walk away unscathed." She reached out toward Damien with the power that had been sleeping inside her for 19 years. The power to nullify, to neutralize, to turn supernatural strength into ordinary weakness. Damien tried to retreat, but it was too late. The moment Lyra's power touched him, his enhanced abilities began to fail. His inhuman speed vanished, his supernatural strength evaporated, and the dark magic simply stopped. "What are you doing to me?" he gasped, stumbling backward. "Leveling the playing field," Lyra replied. Without his supernatural advantages, Damien was just a man. Dangerous, certainly, but no longer the unstoppable force he'd been moments before. And in a room full of werewolves, being just a man was precarious. Alpha Thomas, his wounds already healing, stepped forward with a grim smile. "I believe you were leaving, Mr. Cross." Damien looked around the great hall, taking in the faces of the pack members who surrounded him. Without his magic, he was outnumbered and outmatched. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing toward the shattered entrance. "The girl may have power, but she doesn't understand what she is. And there are others like me, others who will want to claim her gift." "Let them come," Kieran said, moving to stand beside Lyra. "They'll find that she's under the protection of the Alpha King now." Damien's laugh was bitter. "Protection? You can't protect her from what's coming. The old powers are stirring. The ancient enemies are awakening. And when they come for her, and they will come, your protection won't be enough." With that warning, he melted back into the shadows, disappearing as suddenly as he'd appeared. The rogues, leaderless and confused, scattered into the forest. In the sudden silence, Lyra became aware of every eye in the room focused on her. Pack members who had ignored her for years now stared with expressions of awe, fear, and something that might have been respect. "A Null," someone whispered. "She's actually a Null." "The weakest Omega in the pack," Marcus Blackthorne said, his voice filled with disbelief. "How is this possible?" "Because," Kieran said, his storm gray eyes meeting Lyra's with an intensity that made her heart race, "sometimes the greatest power comes disguised as the greatest weakness." He stepped closer, and Lyra caught his scent again, pine and leather and that wild essence that spoke to something deep in her soul. "You saved my life," he said softly. "You saved all of us. I couldn't let him hurt you," Lyra replied, her cheeks flushing. "I didn't even know what I was doing." "Instinct," Kieran said, a small smile playing at his mouth. "The best kind of power is the kind that comes from the heart." Around them, the pack was beginning to assess the damage and tend to the wounded. The attack was over, but Lyra knew that Damien's words carried truth. This was just the beginning, but as she looked into the Alpha King's eyes, she felt something she'd never experienced before. The sense that she wasn't alone, that she had someone who would stand beside her against whatever darkness was coming. "What happens now?" she asked. Kieran's smile widened. "Now, Lyra Ashwood, we prepare for war. Because if Damien Cross thinks he can threaten what's mine, he's about to learn just how wrong he can be." "What's mine?" The word sent a thrill through Lyra's entire body, a promise of protection and something deeper. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, she couldn't shake Damien's warning. The old powers were stirring, ancient enemies were awakening, and somehow she was at the center of it all. The weakest Omega had become the most important person in the supernatural world, and she had no idea what that meant for her future, or her heart. The Alpha King has claimed our Omega as his to protect, but dark forces are gathering that will test both her newfound power and their growing connection. What ancient secrets will be revealed, and can love bloom in the shadow of an approaching war? Chapter 3 will unveil truths that will shake the very foundations of the werewolf world. Don't miss it. Chapter 3, Ancient Secrets and Forbidden Bonds. 3 days after the attack, Moonridge Pack territory had been transformed into a fortress. Lyra stood at the window of her new room, a proper guest suite in the main pack house, and watched as patrols of warriors moved through the forest like shadows. The Alpha King had called in reinforcements from across the Western territories, and now their small pack was protected by some of the most elite fighters in the werewolf world. It should have made her feel safe. Instead, it only reminded her of how much danger she was in. "You're brooding again," came a familiar voice from behind her. Lyra turned to find Kieran standing in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space completely. Over the past 3 days, he'd barely left her side, claiming it was for her protection. But the way his eyes followed her every movement suggested his motivations were more complex than simple duty. "I'm thinking," she corrected, "about what Damien said, about the old powers stirring." Kieran entered the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence, and Lyra was acutely aware that they were alone together for the first time since the attack. "There are things you need to know," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made her stomach clench. "About what you are, about the history of the Nulls, about why Damien wants your power so desperately." "Then tell me," Lyra said, turning to face him fully. "I'm tired of being kept in the dark about my own life." Kieran moved to the small sitting area near the fireplace, settling into one of the leather chairs with fluid grace. "Sit," he said, patting the chair beside him. "This is going to take a while." Lyra hesitated before joining him, hyper-aware of the way their knees almost touched, the way his scent seemed stronger in the intimate space. 500 years ago, Kieran began, the werewolf world was very different. There were no territories, no organized packs, no Alpha Kings. It was chaos, rogues and wild wolves fighting for dominance, humans hunting us with silver and fire, and something else stalking us from the shadows. "Something else?" Lyra asked. "The Shadowkin," Kieran replied, and even speaking the name seemed to darken the room. Creatures of pure malevolent energy, beings that fed on supernatural power and left nothing but empty husks in their wake. They were our greatest enemy and they were winning. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to them?" "The Nulls," Kieran said simply. "Your ancestors were the only ones who could stand against the Shadowkin. The only ones whose power could neutralize their dark magic and send them back to whatever hell they'd crawled out of. But you said they were hunted to extinction," Lyra pointed out. Kieran's expression grew grim. "They were, but not by the Shadowkin, by us, by other werewolves." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. "What? Why?" "Fear," Kieran said, his voice heavy with old shame. "After the Shadowkin were defeated, the Nulls were the most powerful beings in our world. They could neutralize any supernatural ability, turn the strongest alpha into an ordinary human with a touch. Some werewolves began to see them as a threat. So they killed them," Lyra whispered. "Not all at once," Kieran clarified. "It started with suspicion, with whispers that the Nulls were too dangerous. Then came the restrictions. Nulls were forbidden from mating with non-Nulls, forbidden from leaving designated territories, forbidden from using their powers except under strict supervision. They were imprisoned," Lyra said, horror creeping into her voice. "Essentially, yes. And when some Nulls tried to resist..." Kieran's voice trailed off. "They were slaughtered," she finished. "The last known Null died over 200 years ago," Kieran said. "Or so we thought. Clearly some survived, went into hiding, suppressed their abilities so completely that even they forgot what they were. Like my family," Lyra said, pieces clicking into place. "That's why I was so weak, isn't it? Because my Null abilities were suppressed, dormant?" "Exactly. Your wolf was fighting against your true nature, trying to be something you weren't. It's no wonder you seemed weak. You were literally at war with yourself." Lyra leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed. Her entire life, everything she'd believed about herself had been a lie. She wasn't weak, she was powerful beyond imagining. "But if the Nulls are extinct," she said slowly, "how does Damien know about them? How did he recognize what I was?" Kieran's expression darkened. "Because Damien Cross isn't just a rogue werewolf. He's something much worse. He's a Shadowkin." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. "But you said the Shadowkin were defeated," she protested. "We thought they were," Kieran replied. "But it seems some survived just as some Nulls did. They've been hiding, waiting, growing stronger. And now they're ready to reclaim what they see as their rightful place." And they need my power to do it, Lyra said, understanding flooding through her. A Shadowkin with Null abilities would be unstoppable, Kieran confirmed. They could drain supernatural power from their enemies while being immune to any supernatural attacks in return. They would be gods among monsters. Lyra stood abruptly, pacing to the window as anxiety clawed at her chest. So what do we do? How do we stop them? We? Kieran's voice carried a note of amusement. Lyra turned to face him, her chin lifting with determination. Yes, we. This is my fight now, whether I want it or not. I won't hide while innocent people suffer because of what I am. Kieran rose from his chair with predatory grace, moving toward her until he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You're not ready, he said, his voice low and intense. Your power is raw, untrained. You don't know how to control it, how to focus it. If you tried to face Damien again right now, he would destroy you. Then teach me, Lyra said, meeting his storm-gray eyes without flinching. You're the Alpha King. Surely you know something about training supernatural abilities. I know about training werewolf abilities, Kieran corrected. What you have is something else entirely. Then we figure it out together, Lyra insisted. Because the alternative is letting Damien and his Shadowkin destroy everything we care about. Kieran stared at her for a long moment, and Lyra could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the desire to protect her warring with the recognition that she was right. There might be a way, he said finally. But it's dangerous, and it would require you to trust me completely. I already trust you, Lyra said without hesitation. You've protected me, stood by me when no one else would. Of course I trust you. Something shifted in Kieran's expression, something that made her heart race and her wolf purr with satisfaction. He reached up, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. There's something else you need to know, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. About why I was really here that night, why I came to your pack's territory. What do you mean? Lyra asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. I've been having dreams, Kieran admitted. For months, dreams of a woman with green eyes and auburn hair, a woman who could save our world from a darkness I couldn't name. I came here because the dreams led me here. And did you? Lyra whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Find what you were looking for? Yes, Kieran said, his thumb brushing across her lower lip with devastating gentleness. I found you. The air between them crackled with tension, with the kind of electric connection that spoke of destiny and desire intertwined. Lyra felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force stronger than gravity. Kieran, she breathed, his name a prayer on her lips. I know this is complicated, he said, his forehead resting against hers. I know you're dealing with enough without adding this to the mix. But I need you to know, what I feel for you, it's not just about your power. It's about you, Lyra, the woman who threw herself between me and certain death. I feel it too, Lyra admitted, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. This connection between us, this pull, I've never felt anything like it. The mate bond, Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. It's rare for it to manifest so quickly, so strongly. But when it does, Lyra prompted. When it does, it means the moon goddess herself has chosen your path, Kieran finished. It means you're meant to be together, no matter what obstacles stand in your way. The mate bond. Lyra had heard of it. The legendary connection between werewolves that transcended ordinary attraction, that bound two souls together across lifetimes. She'd never imagined it could happen to her. But the timing, she said, voicing the doubt that gnawed at her heart. With everything that's happening, with the danger, the timing is perfect, Kieran interrupted. Don't you see? The mate bond doesn't just connect us emotionally. It connects our power, our strength. Together, we're stronger than we could ever be apart. As if to prove his point, he took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining. The moment their skin touched, Lyra felt it, a surge of power unlike anything she'd experienced before. Her Null abilities, which had felt wild and uncontrolled since their awakening, suddenly felt focused, directed, manageable. How? She gasped, staring at their joined hands. The mate bond creates a feedback loop, Kieran explained. Your power stabilizes mine, and mine helps you control yours. It's why the old Nulls were so effective. They fought alongside their mates. Their power amplified and focused by their bond. So if we complete the mate bond, Lyra said slowly, I'll be able to control my abilities? More than that, Kieran said, his eyes burning with intensity. You'll be able to use them to their full potential. You'll become what you were always meant to be, not just a Null, but a Null Queen. The title sent shivers down Lyra's spine. A Null Queen, the legendary leaders of her people, the ones who had commanded the power to banish entire armies of Shadowkin with a thought. But completing the mate bond, she said, her cheeks flushing with heat. That means... It means claiming each other completely, Kieran confirmed, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. Body, soul, and power. It means binding ourselves together for eternity. The weight of the decision pressed down on Lyra like a physical force. 3 days ago, she'd been nobody, the weakest Omega in a small pack, overlooked and unwanted. Now she was being asked to become a queen, to bind herself to the most powerful Alpha in North America. It should have been terrifying. It should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt like coming home. Yes, she said, the word escaping her lips before she could second-guess herself. Yes, I want that. I want you. Kieran's eyes flared with heat and triumph. And for a moment, Lyra thought he might kiss her right there. Might claim her lips with the same intensity that he'd claimed her heart. But before either of them could move, a sharp knock at the door shattered the intimate moment. Your Majesty, came a voice from the hallway. Marcus, one of Kieran's elite guards. Forgive the interruption, but we have a situation. Kieran closed his eyes, clearly struggling to regain his composure. What kind of situation? 3 more packs have gone silent in the past hour, Marcus replied. And we've received reports of Shadowkin sightings across the territories. Whatever Damien is planning, it's happening now. The romantic bubble that had surrounded them burst like a soap bubble in a hurricane. Lyra felt reality crashing back down around her. We have to go, she said, stepping back from Kieran reluctantly. No, Kieran said firmly. You're not ready for battle, and I won't risk losing you to Damien's schemes. You won't lose me, Lyra said, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Because we're going to complete the mate bond first. Right now, Kieran's eyes widened in surprise. Lyra, you don't understand what you're asking. The mating process, it's intense, overwhelming. It takes time. Time we don't have, Lyra interrupted. You said it yourself. Together we're stronger than apart. If completing the bond will give me the control I need to fight the Shadowkin, then that's what we have to do. Your Majesty? Marcus called again, urgency clear in his voice. Kieran looked torn between duty and desire, between his need to protect her and his recognition that she was right. Finally, he made his decision. Give us 10 minutes, he called to Marcus. Then prepare for departure. Yes, Your Majesty. As Marcus's footsteps retreated, Kieran turned back to Lyra with an expression of fierce determination. Are you sure about this? He asked. Once we start, there's no going back. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, for better or worse, until the end of time. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Lyra replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. I love you, Kieran Nightshade. I love your strength, your honor, your willingness to protect those who can't protect themselves. I love you too, Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. More than I ever thought possible, more than I ever believed I deserved. You're my mate, my queen, my everything. And then he was kissing her, his lips claiming hers with a passion that set her entire body on fire. The mate bond, which had been simmering between them for days, suddenly blazed to life, connecting them on a level deeper than physical, deeper than emotional. Lyra felt Kieran's power flowing into her, stabilizing her chaotic abilities and giving her the control she'd been desperately seeking. At the same time, she felt her own power flowing into him, amplifying his already formidable strength and creating something entirely new, a fusion of alpha, dominance and null neutralization that was greater than the sum of its parts. The world around them seemed to fade away as the mating bond took hold. Lyra was dimly aware of her wolf rising to the surface, not in the weak, confused way it had before, but with purpose and power. She felt Kieran's wolf as well, massive and dominant, but somehow perfectly complementary to her own. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, their eyes glowing with the light of their newly forged bond. Lyra could feel the change immediately. Her power was no longer wild and uncontrolled, but focused and precise. She could sense every supernatural presence in the pack house, could feel the exact nature of their abilities, could neutralize them with a thought if she chose. How do you feel? Kieran asked, his hands still framing her face. Powerful, Lyra said, wonder coloring her voice. Complete. Like I've been half asleep my entire life and I'm finally awake. Good, Kieran said, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead, because we're about to put that power to the test. They dressed quickly in practical clothes and gathered their weapons. When they emerged from the room, they found Marcus waiting with a team of elite warriors. The Silverpine pack went silent first, Marcus reported grimly. Then Ironwood and Crescent Moon. We've sent scouts, but none have returned. Shadowkin, Kieran said with certainty. Damien is making his move, trying to eliminate our allies before we can mount a coordinated defense. There's more, Marcus continued. We've received a message from Damien himself. He's taken hostages from each of the fallen packs, alphas, betas, children. He says he'll release them in exchange for... He glanced at Lyra. In exchange for the Null. Rage flared in Kieran's eyes, his alpha power radiating outward in waves. He wants to trade innocent lives for my mate. He's even more delusional than I thought. It's a trap, Lyra said, though her heart ached at the thought of innocent people suffering because of her. He knows you won't let me go to him willingly, so he's trying to force our hand. Exactly, Kieran agreed. Which is why we're not going to play by his rules. We're going to hit him first, hit him hard, and end this before he can hurt anyone else. Do we know where he is? Lyra asked. Marcus nodded. Our remaining scouts tracked the Shadowkin forces to the old Blackwood territory. It's been abandoned for decades. Perfect place for someone who wants to avoid detection. The plan they developed was simple, but dangerous. They would approach the Blackwood territory in 3 groups, with Kieran and Lyra leading the main assault force. Their goal was to punch through Damien's defenses and get Lyra close enough to use her power against the Shadowkin army. The journey to Blackwood territory took 2 hours, traveling through dense forest under the cover of darkness. As they drew closer to their destination, the very air seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive. The trees were twisted and gnarled, and even the moonlight seemed dimmer here. Can you feel them? Kieran asked quietly. Lyra nodded. Her enhanced senses could detect the Shadowkin presence like a stain on the natural world. Cold, hungry, and utterly alien. There were dozens of them, maybe more, all gathered around what had once been the Blackwood pack house. The hostages? She whispered. Alive, Kieran confirmed. I can hear their heartbeats. Damien is keeping his word, at least for now. They dismounted at the edge of the territory, leaving their horses with a small guard detail. From here, they would proceed on foot, using stealth and surprise to get as close as possible before the fighting began. The Blackwood pack house had once been magnificent. Now it was a ruin of broken stone and twisted metal, its windows dark and empty like the eye sockets of a skull. But it wasn't abandoned. Lyra could see movement in the shadows, could feel the malevolent presence of the creatures that had claimed it. Remember, Kieran said, his voice barely audible. Stay close to me. Don't try to be a hero. We go in together, we fight together, we come out together. Together, Lyra agreed, drawing strength from the mate bond that connected them. They moved forward as one, their warriors spreading out behind them in a carefully coordinated advance. The plan was to get within 50 yards of the pack house before launching their assault, close enough for Lyra's power to be effective, but far enough away to avoid being immediately overwhelmed. They made it 30 yards before the trap was sprung. Shadowkin erupted from the ground around them, rising from hidden burrows like nightmares given form. They were even more horrifying up close than Lyra had imagined. Humanoid in shape, but wrong in every detail, with skin like oil and eyes like burning coals. Now. Kieran roared, shifting into his massive wolf form even as he spoke. The battle erupted with savage intensity. Werewolf warriors clashed with Shadowkin in a deadly dance of claws and fangs, silver weapons flashing in the moonlight. The air filled with the sounds of combat, snarls, screams, and the wet sound of violence. Lyra found herself in the center of the chaos, her newly awakened power flowing through her like liquid fire. Every time a Shadowkin tried to use its dark magic against her, she turned it back on them, watching as they writhed and dissolved under the force of their own reflected power. But there were so many of them, and more kept coming. For every Shadowkin that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. We need to reach the pack house, Kieran called out, his mental voice clear in Lyra's mind despite the chaos. Damien is in there. If we can take him out, the rest will fall apart. Lyra nodded, pushing forward through the melee with Kieran at her side. His massive wolf form carved a path through the enemy ranks, while her power neutralized any supernatural attacks that came their way. But as they reached the steps of the ruined pack house, a new figure emerged from the shadows. Damian Cross stood in the doorway, no longer bothering to maintain his human disguise. His true form was revealed, tall and gaunt, with skin like midnight and eyes that burned with cold fire. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "Let the hostages go," Kieran demanded, shifting back to human form. "Your fight is with us, not with innocent people." "Innocent?" Damian laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "There are no innocents in this war, King. Only the strong and the weak, the hunters and the prey." He gestured, and the air around them shimmered. Suddenly, Lyra could see them. Dozens of pack members from the fallen territories, suspended in cages of shadow that hung from the ruined walls. They were alive but unconscious, their life force being slowly drained. "You monster," Lyra breathed, horror and rage warring in her chest. "Monster?" Damian tilted his head, studying her with those burning eyes. "I am evolution, little Null. I am what your kind could become if you embraced your true nature instead of hiding behind outdated morality." "My true nature is to protect people," Lyra said, stepping forward despite Kieran's warning growl. "To heal, not to harm, is it?" Damian asked. "Then why does your power destroy everything it touches? Why do supernatural beings fear you more than death itself?" "Because sometimes," Lyra said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "destruction is necessary to protect what matters. Sometimes you have to tear down the darkness to let in the light." She reached out with her power, not to neutralize or reflect, but to simply push. The wave of null energy that erupted from her was unlike anything she'd ever produced before. Pure, focused, and absolutely devastating to anything supernatural in its path. The shadow cages holding the hostages dissolved instantly, dropping the unconscious pack members safely to the ground. The lesser Shadowkin that had been advancing on their position simply ceased, their dark essence unraveled by contact with Lyra's purified power. But Damian himself weathered the assault, his greater strength allowing him to resist what had destroyed his minions. He staggered but remained standing, his burning eyes now fixed on Lyra with a mixture of hunger and respect. "Magnificent," he breathed. "You're even more powerful than I imagined. With abilities like that, we could rule this world together. The only thing I want to reshape," Lyra said, "is your face. Preferably with my fist." Damian's expression shifted from admiration to cold fury. "So be it. If you won't join me willingly, I'll simply have to take what I need by force." He lunged forward with inhuman speed, his claws extended and wreathed in shadow fire. But he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd forgotten about Kieran. The Alpha King intercepted Damian's attack, his own claws meeting the Shadowkins in a shower of sparks. The two supernatural beings grappled with savage intensity, their battle shaking the very foundations of the ruined pack house. But Damian was older, more experienced, and his power was fed by the life force he'd been draining from his hostages. Slowly but surely, he began to gain the upper hand, his shadow fire burning through Kieran's defenses. "No!" Lyra screamed, watching as the man she loved was forced to his knees by Damian's relentless assault. She reached out with her power again, but this time it was different. Instead of trying to destroy or neutralize, she focused on connection, on the mate bond that linked her to Kieran. She poured her strength into him, her power flowing through their connection to amplify his own abilities. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Kieran's eyes blazed with silver fire as Lyra's power merged with his own, creating something entirely new, a fusion of alpha dominance and null purity that was anathema to creatures of darkness. "Impossible," Damian gasped, staggering backward as Kieran rose to his feet, power radiating from him in visible waves. "You're right," Kieran said, his voice carrying harmonics of both his own authority and Lyra's purifying force. "It should be impossible. But love makes all things possible." The final battle was brief but decisive. Damian, for all his power and cunning, couldn't stand against the combined might of a mated Alpha King and Null Queen. Kieran's claws, enhanced by Lyra's purifying energy, cut through the Shadowkin's defenses like they were made of paper. With a final, echoing scream, Damian Cross dissolved into shadow and was gone, his essence scattered to the winds by the power of their bond. In the sudden silence that followed, Lyra became aware of the sounds of victory around them. The remaining Shadowkin were either fleeing or surrendering to the werewolf warriors. The hostages were awakening, confused but alive. "Is it over?" Lyra asked, hardly daring to believe it. "This part is," Kieran said, pulling her into his arms. But there will be other challenges, other enemies. There always are. Then we'll face them together, Lyra said, standing on her toes to kiss him. The Alpha King and his Null Queen. Together, Kieran agreed, and in that word was a promise of forever. The battle is won, but what does the future hold for our newly mated pair? The final chapter will reveal the new world they'll build together, and the legacy they'll leave for generations to come. Don't miss the epic conclusion. Chapter 4. The Dawn of a New Era 6 months later. The Great Assembly had never seen anything like it. Lyra stood at the edge of the massive amphitheater carved into the mountainside, watching as representatives from every pack in North America took their seats. Alphas who had never spoken to each other, betas from territories that had been enemies for generations, and even omegas traditionally excluded from such gatherings, all united for the first time in werewolf history. Nervous? Kieran asked, appearing at her side with the silent grace that still made her heart skip a beat. Terrified, Lyra admitted, smoothing down the flowing silver dress that marked her as Null Queen. What if they don't accept the new laws? What if they think we're moving too fast? Kieran took her hand, their mate bond immediately flooding her with his calm confidence. Then we'll convince them. Together, we've already accomplished the impossible, ended a war that could have destroyed our entire species, united the territories under a single banner, and proven that strength comes in many forms. Queen Lyra, came a familiar voice from behind them. It's time. Lyra turned to see Elena approaching. But the older woman looked very different than she had in the kitchens of Moonridge Pack. Now she wore the formal robes of a royal advisor, her bearing confident. She'd been one of Lyra's first appointments to the new Royal Council, a governing body that included representatives from all levels of werewolf society. How do they look? Lyra asked, nodding toward the assembled crowd. Curious, Elena replied diplomatically. Some skeptical, some hopeful, but they're all here and that's what matters. Indeed, the turnout was unprecedented. Over 300 pack leaders, representing nearly 50,000 werewolves, had traveled to the neutral territory of the Rocky Mountain Preserve for this historic gathering. A horn sounded from the amphitheater, its deep note echoing off the mountain walls. The assembly was ready to begin. Lyra and Kieran made their way to the central platform, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Every eye in the amphitheater was fixed on them, the unlikely pair who had risen from obscurity to reshape their entire world. Kieran spoke first, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the vast space. Brothers and sisters of the wolf, he began using the traditional greeting. We gather today not as separate packs, not as competing territories, but as one people united by blood and moon. A murmur ran through the crowd, some approving, some uncertain. For too long, Kieran continued, we have allowed fear to divide us. Fear of change, fear of weakness, fear of those who are different. That fear nearly cost us everything when the Shadowkin returned. It was only by standing together, by embracing our differences as strengths, that we survived. He gestured to Lyra, and she stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. 6 months ago, I was considered the weakest member of my pack. I was mocked, overlooked, and deemed worthless by the very people who should have protected me. But weakness, I learned, is often just strength that hasn't been recognized yet. She paused, letting her words sink in. The laws we propose today aren't just about changing how we govern ourselves. They're about changing how we see each other. They're about creating a world where every werewolf, regardless of their rank or abilities, has value and purpose. And what exactly are these laws? Called out Alpha Rebecca Morrison from the Silverpine Pack. Her tone was respectful but challenging. Lyra had been expecting this question. First, she said, her voice growing stronger, the abolition of the traditional hierarchy system. No more alphas, betas, and omegas as rigid castes. Instead, we propose a merit-based system where leadership is earned through wisdom, courage, and service to the pack. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some pack leaders leaped to their feet in protest, while others nodded thoughtfully. You're asking us to abandon thousands of years of tradition, shouted Alpha David Blackstone from the Ironwood Pack. The hierarchy exists for a reason. It maintains order, prevents chaos. Does it? Lyra challenged, her green eyes flashing with determination. Or does it simply ensure that those born into power stay in power, while those born into servitude remain servants forever? She gestured to the crowd around them. Look at this assembly. How many of you became alphas because you were the strongest, the wisest, the most capable? And how many became alphas simply because you were born to alpha parents? The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. The second law, Lyra continued, addresses the rights of all pack members. No werewolf may be denied education, healthcare, or basic dignity because of their birth rank. No werewolf may be forced into unwanted matings or prevented from pursuing their chosen path in life. This time, the reaction was more mixed. Many of the younger pack members looked hopeful, while some of the older alphas appeared troubled. And the third law, Kieran said, stepping forward, establishes the Council of Territories, a governing body with representatives from every pack, every rank, every region. No longer will the fate of our people be decided by a handful of powerful alphas. This is madness, declared Alpha Marcus Stormwind from the Northern Territories. You're asking us to give up our authority, our birthright, for some idealistic dream of equality. I'm asking you to give up your privilege, Lyra replied calmly, in exchange for something far more valuable, a united, strong, and just society where every werewolf can reach their full potential. And what makes you think this will work? Asked Alpha Sarah Chen from the coastal packs. Her tone was curious rather than hostile. Lyra smiled, and for the first time since the assembly began, she felt truly confident. Because we've already seen it work. In the 6 months since the Shadowkin War ended, the packs that have implemented these reforms have seen remarkable improvements. She gestured to Elena, who stepped forward with a thick folder of documents. The Moonridge pack, where these reforms were first tested, has seen a 40% increase in pack satisfaction and a 60% decrease in members leaving for other territories. The Silverpine pack, which adopted modified versions of these laws 3 months ago, has reported similar improvements. But what about strength? Demanded Alpha Blackstone. What about our ability to defend ourselves? If we abandon the hierarchy, if we give power to the weak. Lyra's voice cut through his words like a blade. You mean people like me? She stepped to the center of the platform, her power beginning to radiate outward in visible waves. Every supernatural being in the amphitheater could feel it, the pure, overwhelming force of her Null abilities. I was considered the weakest Omega in my pack, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. But my weakness saved the Alpha King's life. My weakness defeated an army of Shadowkin. My weakness has helped forge the strongest alliance our people have ever known. She let her power pulse outward, not to harm or threaten, but to demonstrate. Every werewolf in the amphitheater felt their own abilities momentarily neutralized, not painfully, but gently, like a reminder of what true power could accomplish. Strength isn't about dominance, Lyra continued as her power receded. It's about lifting others up, about protecting those who can't protect themselves, about building something greater than yourself. The amphitheater had fallen completely silent. Even the most vocal opponents of the new laws seemed to be reconsidering their positions. I have a question, came a voice from the back of the assembly. A young woman stood up, barely out of her teens, with the slight build and nervous demeanor of an Omega. My name is Jessica Torres, from the Desert Wind Pack. I wanted to ask the Queen something. Lyra nodded encouragingly. Please speak freely. You said that every werewolf has value and purpose, Jessica said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. But what about those of us who really are weak? What about those of us who can't fight, who can't lead, who don't have special powers? What place is there for us in this new world? The question hung in the air, and Lyra could see that many others were wondering the same thing. Jessica, Lyra said gently, may I ask what you do in your pack? I work in the nursery, Jessica replied, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I take care of the children while their parents are working or training. And how many children are in your care? 37, Jessica said, her voice barely audible. 37, Lyra repeated, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater. 37 future pack members, 37 young werewolves who will grow up to be leaders, warriors, healers, teachers, and protectors. And you're the one shaping their early years, teaching them their first lessons about pack loyalty and cooperation. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Tell me, Jessica, if you disappeared tomorrow, if you were no longer there to care for those children, what would happen to your pack? Jessica's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The parents wouldn't be able to work. The children wouldn't be properly cared for. Everything would fall apart. Exactly, Lyra said, her voice warm with approval. You're not weak, Jessica. You're essential. You're the foundation that allows everything else to function. She turned to address the entire assembly. This is what the old hierarchy never understood, that every role, every contribution, every person has value. A pack isn't strong because it has powerful alphas. A pack is strong because every member, from the mightiest warrior to the gentlest caregiver, is valued and supported. The change in the atmosphere was palpable. Lyra could see minds opening, perspectives shifting, as the assembled pack leaders began to truly understand what she was proposing. The debate continued for hours, with pack leaders asking detailed questions about implementation, enforcement, and the countless practical challenges of such sweeping reform. But gradually, Lyra could sense the mood shifting. Fear and resistance were giving way to curiosity and cautious optimism. Finally, as the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks, Alpha Morrison stood up. I call for a vote, she announced. All in favor of implementing the proposed reforms? Hands began to rise throughout the amphitheater, slowly at first, then with increasing speed as pack leaders saw their neighbors supporting the changes. When the count was finished, the result was overwhelming. 237 votes in favor, with only 43 opposed and 20 abstentions. The amphitheater erupted in cheers and applause. Lyra felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what they'd accomplished. Not just a political victory, but a fundamental transformation of werewolf society. We did it, she whispered to Kieran, hardly able to believe it was real. No, Kieran replied, pulling her into his arms. You did it. You showed them what was possible. 1 year later, Lyra stood in the nursery of the New Haven Pack House, watching as 24 children played together under the watchful eyes of their caregivers. The sight never failed to fill her with wonder. Alpha children and Omega children playing side by side, their natural hierarchy not yet poisoned by the prejudices of the old system. Your Majesty, came a familiar voice from behind her. Lyra turned to see Jessica Torres approaching, but the nervous young woman from the assembly was gone. In her place stood a confident pack leader, wearing the formal robes of a regional coordinator. Jessica, Lyra said warmly, embracing the younger woman, how are the reforms progressing in the desert territories? Better than we dared hope, Jessica replied, her face glowing with pride. 17 packs have fully implemented the new system, and 5 more are in transition. We've seen remarkable improvements in pack cohesion and member satisfaction. As if summoned by her words, Kieran appeared in the doorway. Even after a year of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart race. He'd changed too over the past months. The weight of absolute authority had been replaced by something lighter, more collaborative. Ready? He asked, extending his hand to her. Lyra nodded, taking his hand and feeling the familiar surge of power that came from their mate bond. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone, not just in terms of supernatural abilities, but in wisdom, compassion, and vision. They made their way to the Royal Council chambers, where representatives from across North America were gathering for their monthly meeting. The chamber itself was a symbol of the new order, circular rather than hierarchical, with no head table or elevated seats. Every voice was equal here. Your Majesties, said Council Speaker Maria Santos, a former Omega who had risen to become one of the most respected leaders in the reformed territories. We have much to discuss today. The most important item was saved for last, the proposal for the International Werewolf Accord. The European packs have expressed interest in adopting our reforms, Maria reported. They've seen our success and want to implement similar changes in their own territories. And the Asian territories? Kieran asked, more cautious but open to dialogue. The Australian packs are already moving forward with their own version of the reforms. Lyra felt a thrill of excitement. When they'd started this journey, she'd hoped to change their own small corner of the werewolf world. The idea that their reforms might spread globally was almost too wonderful to believe. There's something else, Maria continued. We've received a formal request from the European Council. They want to meet with you personally, Your Majesty. They want to hear about the reforms directly from the Null Queen herself. When? Lyra asked, though she already knew she would accept. Next month. The meeting would be held in Geneva, neutral territory. Representatives from every major pack in Europe would attend. Lyra looked at Kieran, seeing her own excitement reflected in his storm-gray eyes. What do you think? I think, Kieran said with a smile, that the world is about to change again. and I can't wait to see what we accomplish together." As the meeting continued around them, Lyra found her thoughts drifting to the future. A year ago, she'd been fighting just to survive, just to find her place in a world that seemed determined to reject her. Now she was helping to reshape that world, to create something better for the generations that would come after. But perhaps, most importantly, she'd found love, not just romantic love, though her bond with Kieran was stronger than ever, but love for her people, for her purpose, for the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The weakest Omega had become the strongest queen, and this was only the beginning. Epilogue, 3 years later. The garden behind the royal residence was in full bloom, roses and jasmine filling the air with their sweet fragrance. Lyra sat on a stone bench, watching as her 2-year-old daughter chased butterflies through the flower beds with the determined focus that only small children could muster. "Mama, look," little Luna called out, her dark hair, so like her father's, catching the sunlight as she pointed to a particularly large butterfly. "It's blue." "I see it, sweetheart," Lyra replied, her heart swelling with love and pride. Luna was everything she and Kieran had hoped for: strong, curious, and completely unaware that there had ever been a time when her mixed Alpha Null heritage would have been considered impossible. "She's going to be a handful," came Kieran's voice from behind her. Lyra leaned back, against her mate's chest as he settled onto the bench beside her, his arms wrapping around her in the familiar embrace that still felt like coming home. "She gets that from you," Lyra said with a laugh. "The stubbornness, the determination to get her own way." "And the compassion?" Kieran asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "The instinct to protect others? Where does that come from?" "That," Lyra said softly, "comes from both of us." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter play in the garden that had become a symbol of the new world they'd built together. The International Werewolf Accord had been signed 2 years ago, establishing the reformed hierarchy system as the global standard. Shadowkin attacks had become increasingly rare as the creatures found it harder to exploit the divisions and weaknesses of a united werewolf society. "The council meeting went well?" Lyra asked, noting the satisfied expression on Kieran's face. "Better than well," Kieran replied. "The South American territories have officially joined the Accord. That makes us truly global now. Every major werewolf population in the world united under the same principles of equality and cooperation." Lyra nodded, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. It had taken 3 years, but they'd done it. They'd transformed not just their own society, but werewolf civilization as a whole. "Mama." "Papa!" Luna came running toward them, her small hands cupped carefully around something. "Look what I found." She opened her hands to reveal a small injured bird, a baby robin that must have fallen from its nest. The tiny creature was breathing but clearly hurt, one wing bent at an odd angle. "Oh, sweetheart," Lyra said gently. "The poor little thing is hurt." "Can you fix it?" Luna asked, her green eyes, so like her mother's, wide with hope and concern. Lyra looked at the bird, then at her daughter's expectant face. Her Null abilities had evolved over the years, becoming more refined and controlled. She could neutralize supernatural threats, yes, but she'd also learned to use her power for healing, for restoration. "I can try," she said, taking the bird gently from Luna's hands. She closed her eyes, focusing her power not on destruction or neutralization, but on healing. She felt the bird's tiny life force, fragile but determined, and carefully used her abilities to mend the broken wing, to ease the creature's pain. When she opened her eyes, the robin was alert and healthy, its wing fully healed. She opened her hands and the bird took flight, circling once around the garden before disappearing into the trees. "You did it!" Luna exclaimed, clapping her hands in delight. "You made it better!" "We all have the power to make things better," Lyra said, pulling her daughter into her lap. "Sometimes it's big things, like changing laws or fighting bad people. Sometimes it's small things, like helping a hurt animal or being kind to someone who's sad. Will I be able to do that too?" Luna asked. "When I grow up?" "You already do," Kieran said, ruffling his daughter's hair. "Every time you're kind, every time you help someone, every time you choose to do what's right instead of what's easy, you're making the world better." Luna considered this seriously, her young mind processing the weight of the responsibility and opportunity that lay ahead of her. "I want to be like you and Mama," she said finally. "I want to help people and make them happy." "Then you will," Lyra said, holding her daughter close. Because that's what our family does. That's what we've always done. As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lyra reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the weakest Omega to the Null Queen, from a loveless existence to a life filled with purpose and joy, from a world divided by fear to one united by hope. It hadn't been easy. There had been battles to fight, enemies to face, and countless challenges to overcome. But they'd done it together, she and Kieran, their allies and friends, their people who had chosen to believe in something better. "What are you thinking about?" Kieran asked, sensing her contemplative mood through their mate bond. "The future," Lyra replied, watching as Luna chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. "What kind of world our daughter will inherit, what challenges she'll face, what opportunities she'll have." "She'll face them with strength," Kieran said confidently. "With wisdom, with compassion, and with the knowledge that she's part of something greater than herself. And she won't face them alone," Lyra added. "She'll have her pack, her family, her people. She'll have the foundation we've built for her." As they gathered Luna and headed inside for dinner, Lyra felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The girl who had once been called the weakest Omega had become something she'd never imagined possible. Not just a queen, but a mother, a leader, a symbol of hope for werewolves everywhere. But perhaps most importantly, she'd become exactly who she was meant to be. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges, triumphs and setbacks. There would be new enemies to face, new problems to solve, new worlds to build. But whatever came, they would face it together, united by love, strengthened by diversity, and guided by the simple truth that everyone, no matter how weak they might seem, had the power to change the world. The weakest Omega had saved the Alpha King's life, and in doing so, had saved them all. And this was only the beginning of their story. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey from weakness to strength, from isolation to love, from despair to hope. If you enjoyed this epic tale of the Null Queen and her Alpha King, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing paranormal romance stories. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, and let us know in the comments what other supernatural adventures you'd like to see next. Remember, sometimes the greatest power comes from the most unexpected places, and love truly can conquer all. Until next time, keep believing in the magic of transformation and the strength that lies within us all.